Fuse, what's going on? How are we doing tonight? Good? Man, I am so excited to be here tonight because the reality is, it wasn't too long ago that I was sitting in those seats right there. And so to prove it to you, just in case you thought I was lying, I brought a picture of my ECU days to show you guys. It's going to come up there in 1 second. Hey, that is the moment, just like Jason was talking about, where I was surrounded by drunk people. That is me right there, and that is my wife right next to me on the left. And we graduated just over a year ago. And so, man, time flies so quickly. While I was at ECU, I studied business. We got any business majors in the house? Wow, I only see like 2 hands. I thought that was a popular major. Hey, my wife, while she was at ECU, she studied nursing. Do we have any nursing majors? Oh, man. So I guess the nursing majors are just way more prideful than the business majors. Listen, I get it. Hey, I worked real hard for my degree, right? But, like, my work hard was, like, writing a 250-page discussion board, while my wife's work hard for her nursing degree was, like, I literally don't sleep for a whole week because I'm memorizing every single bone in the body. But, hey, she made it, and if you're a nursing major, you'll make it. So worth it. Anyways, guys, I am so excited to be here tonight and to continue on in our series, Mountains. But before I get there, let me just recap where we have been for the past 2 weeks. And so, kicking off Mountains, 2 weeks ago, we had Pastor Devin bringing an incredible word on the Sermon on the Mount, talking about being salt and light. And he begged this question, like, what if the mountain moments that we have, what if they're not so much about us as they are about the people who have yet to go up the mountain yet? Such a good word from Pastor Devin. And then just last week, Pastor Chris talked to us about Moses and him seeing God's glory on Mount Sinai, right? And Pastor Chris talked to us about how the Moses mountain is this intentional posture and meeting place solely with Jesus, and how we have to work for those moments. We have to work for those intimate moments with Jesus. And tonight, I'm going to be bringing us to another mountain story called the Mount of Olives, and taking a look at how Jesus changes the perspective of the disciples in this mountain story. But before I get there, I want to remember the subtitle of this series, that in these mountain moments, we are never the same again, right? And this is something that I have to check my heart on, if I'm being honest with you. Right? I'm an emotional guy, okay? Just being honest. Devin can attest for me. I'm an emotional guy. Like, I shed some tears often, and by often I mean like every single Sunday. And so I have to check my heart that these moments I have with Jesus are not so much about an emotional high, right? They're not so much about me just feeling an emotional connection with Jesus, but that I actually leave changed, that there's actually life change that occurs in my life. It's like the reality is, those moments that you have with Jesus, they're about him molding you into the young man or young woman that he is calling you to be, and that the world out there needs you to be. Right, and so tonight, as we continue on in Mountains, I want to take us to this story, one of the lesser-known mountain stories in the Bible, called the Mount of Olives. It's in Matthew 24. If you want to turn your Bibles there, if you don't have a Bible, it is totally okay. I got a big, giant Bible behind me that will have the verses on it. And as you turn there, I want to tell you about a story in my life. I'm a big story guy. I love sharing stories. And so let me just tell you about this story as you're turning to Matthew 24. So I'll never forget, I think I was in 7th grade at the time, and I'm with some of my buddies, and we're hanging out, and my friend has something that I have never seen before, okay? He has a magic 8-ball, and I'm like enamored by this thing. And at the time, I have a girlfriend, right? And like, you got to understand, this girlfriend I had, we're about as serious as you can get in 7th grade, right? She was the apple of my eye, and I thought I was going to marry her. And so, like, I have this idea, okay, I can see into the future with this 8-ball. So I'm going to ask it some questions about my girlfriend. And so I tell my friend, hey, we got to ask this thing if I'm going to marry her. Like if she is really going to be the one for me. Because I got to know, man. I want to know. And so I tell him to ask it, and he asks it, and he shakes up the magic 8-ball. And like, y'all, when I say my heart was torn in half when that magic 8-ball said no. I'm like, no, this can't be it. This cannot be it. Do that thing one more time. Ask again. That cannot be right. And so he shakes it up, and again it says no. And I am just like devastated at this point, right? Because like, let me just bring you back to the mind of 7th grade Jake in this moment. I thought I had seen the future, right? I thought I had seen the future. And so I get on the phone and I call my girlfriend and I'm like, hey baby, listen, it's a really long story, but like I was just talking to this magic 8-ball and I don't think it's gonna work out between us. Okay, bye. Hang up the phone, right? Because I thought I had seen the future. You know, here's the thing. I know that's like such a silly story, but the reality is I think so often we think that if we could see the future, that we would have like this advantage. We would have another perspective on life if we just knew what the future held. Like I know some of y'all in here are thinking, man, if I just knew the degree that I was supposed to get, I wouldn't have to waste so much time taking all these classes that don't matter to me. Or like, man, if I just knew the job I was supposed to have when I graduate, I'm sure life would go so much smoother. Or like, if I just knew the person that I was supposed to marry, that I was supposed to spend the rest of my life with, I wouldn't have to waste so much time dating all these people who ultimately aren't going to be the one. Right? We think that if we could just see into the future, that we would have an advantage in the here and now. And this is exactly what we see in Matthew chapter 24, in the Mount of Olives. Jesus gives his disciples a glimpse into the future and hopes that it would change their lives. And so let's jump in with Matthew chapter 24, verses 1 and 2. And I want to give us 3 ways here that Jesus changes the perspective of the disciples. So Matthew 24, verses 1 and 2, it says, Jesus left the temple and was walking away when his disciples came up to call his attention to its buildings. Do you see all these things? Jesus asked. Truly I tell you, not one stone here will be left on another. Everyone will be thrown down. And so my first point that I have for you guys tonight, if you're taking notes, is focus on the kingdom. Focus on the kingdom. And let me start off here by setting the scene and what's really going on. Right? So Jesus' disciples, they're like some good old country boys from this small town of Galilee. Right? They're from this tiny, tiny little town called Galilee. And like I can get down with that, right? Because I'm from this town called Fuquay Varina. Has anyone in here actually ever heard of Fuquay Varina? Okay. Man, Fuquay ain't that small, I guess. Goodness gracious. Yes, I am from Fuquay Varina, and I know it's grown, right? But Fuquay used to be like a Bojangles and a gas station, and that's it, right? And so I want you to imagine that Galilee is like this tiny, tiny town where the disciples are from, and they're going to Jerusalem in this story, and Jerusalem is this giant city. And so when I picture this, like I just imagine it's like going to New York and walking down Times Square for the very first time. Like you're just looking up at all these giant buildings and absolutely enamored by how incredible it all is. The disciples in this moment are like completely in awe, just taking it all in. And I imagine like Jesus is just totally nonchalantly walking through while they're like freaking out over all these buildings. And they're like, Jesus, do you even see this? This is so incredible. Do you even see all these buildings and how amazing this is? Right? And this is how Jesus responds. He says, truly I tell you, not one stone here will be left on another. Everyone will be thrown down. Now in this moment, he's directly talking about the destruction of the temple that would occur some 40 years later. But here's what he was showing his disciples, and here's what I believe he's showing us in this. That the things of this world will not last. The things of this world will not last. That even the best and the greatest things this world has to offer, that they're only temporary at best. And I know you know that, right? I know that's such a simple truth that we know, but some of you stepped foot on a college campus for the first time this year. Some of you have been there for a few years, and we would be lying to ourselves if we said that those college campuses at Pitt and at ECU, that they didn't have some of the best things that this world has to offer, right? If there was something worth pursuing here on this earth of this world, then it would be at one of those campuses. And Jesus is in the midst of that saying, man, that stuff is temporary. All that stuff is temporary, but me and my kingdom are forever. And so, Fuse, my question to you is, does your life reflect that some things are temporary and some things are eternal? Does your life reflect that some things are temporary and some things are eternal? When I think about what it's like having this change of perspective, one thing I love is hockey. I love to play hockey, right? And when I have this change of perspective, that I'm more focused on the eternal, hockey isn't as much about me having a good time and doing something I love. Yeah, that's part of it, but it becomes so much more about me using the gifts and abilities that God has given to me to connect with a group of people who may not have anyone else to tell them about Jesus. And so what does that look like in your life? Your clubs, your organizations, your classes, whatever it is you are a part of. Man, all that stuff is temporary, right? But the people you go to class with, the people you are in clubs with, man, they are eternal beings. And they're going to spend eternity one place or another, right? And so Fuse, are you focused on the eternal, or are you focused on the temporary? And can I just say this, that the people around you will notice when you are really focused on the eternal. When you are really focused on the kingdom of heaven, people around you, man, they will see it. So I grew up in Michigan, and one thing we have in Michigan is unions. Basically, these groups of people that fight for workers' rights. And I'll never forget one summer, we had construction workers repave the road in front of my house, and it was only about a 100-yard stretch, maybe from that end of the building to this end in front of my house. And one of the things the union had worked out for these construction workers is that they would be paid hourly instead of by the job. So basically what that meant is they had no timeline for finishing this because they were being paid hourly and not by the job. And legitimately, it took almost 6 months for them to pave that road. Right? For 6 months, we had to deal with going in and around this construction equipment and these people who were working on the road. And it was so obvious that they didn't care about building that road. Right? They were just in it for the money. They weren't really passionate about building this road. They only cared about the money. And so, Fuse, I would say to you, do the people around you, do they see that you are passionate about the kingdom of heaven, that you are focused on eternal things and not just temporary things? Because if you are, man, they will be able to see it in you. And so the first change of perspective that Jesus gives his disciples is a shift of focus from the temporary things, from the fading things of this world to the permanent, eternal things of him and his kingdom. And after Jesus tells them about how the temple will be destroyed, his disciples ask when he will be coming again. Jesus, when are you coming back? And this is what he says in Matthew 24, verses 6 through 10. He says, you will hear of wars and rumors of wars, but see to it that you are not alarmed. Such things must happen, but the end is still to come. Nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. There will be famines and earthquakes in various places. All of these are the beginning of birth pains. Then you will be handed over to be persecuted and put to death, and you will be hated by all nations because of me. At that time, many will turn away from the faith and will betray and hate each other. And many false prophets will appear and deceive many people. Like, I want you to see that this right here is so much less about Jesus pinpointing a date of his return than it is about him telling us how to live and what to expect in our life if we have put our faith in him. He essentially tells his disciples right here that life is going to be hard. That life is going to be hard. And so my second point for you, if you are taking notes, is to face the trials. Face the trials. Like, we know about this. Again, this is such a simple truth. Every Christian has been told that there's going to be hard times in life. There's going to be trials in life. But remember that this story in the Mount of Olives is about Jesus changing the perspective of the disciples, right? And so here's what I want you to consider. That how we as Christians face trials and face difficult times in life, well, actually, it says a whole lot about where we stand with Jesus and how we're walking with Jesus. And specifically in two ways. First off, like, we should not be surprised when difficult things come our way. And like, I know it's so easy to say that, but how often do things not work out like we were expecting, and we get so upset at God, we get so frustrated and thrown off. And so as Christians, like, we should not be surprised when difficult things come our way. Actually, we should rejoice in the midst of those hard times. James says this in the book of James, chapter 1, verse 2. He says, "Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds." Because we understand that God is trying to do something in us through those trials. Right? Jesus says this right after he tells his disciples of the trouble that's coming. In Matthew chapter 24, verses 12 and 13, he says, "Because of the increase of wickedness, the love of most will grow cold." But don't miss this right here. He says, "But the one who stands firm to the end will be saved." Right? He's reminding his disciples right here that, hey, just because you put your faith in me, it doesn't mean that you get saved from the trials. It actually means that you're going to be saved through the trials, that through the difficult moments in life, I'm actually trying to do something in you, and I'm trying to perfect your faith in the midst of that. You know, when I think about this, I just imagine Jesus telling the disciples how the temple is going to fall, right? How the temple is going to crumble. And you got to imagine at this point, Jesus, he's been telling the people on earth about how his kingdom is coming, right? About the kingdom of heaven. He's been talking about it so much. And so you got to imagine in the disciples' head, they're thinking, okay, the temple is falling. Jesus, I wonder if that's where he's going to build his kingdom. I wonder if that plot of land right there where the temple is going to fall, I wonder if that's where Jesus is going to build his kingdom, right? And actually, we know in this moment that Jesus isn't trying to build his kingdom on that plot of land right there, but he's trying to build his kingdom on the hearts of the disciples. And here's what I want you to see, Fuse. That the trials and the difficult times that we walk through, right, that's how Jesus clears out that space in our hearts for him to build his kingdom. Because just like the temple had to fall before something else could be built there, so often we have these idols in our hearts and these things in our hearts that have to fall before his kingdom can be built upon our hearts. Can I share a story about how this happened in my life? You know, I mentioned I love playing hockey, and I grew up playing hockey my whole life. I'm from Michigan, so we don't have much else to do there. There's a ton of ice. I got a couple pictures of my hockey days up here on the screen. And so, yeah, I grew up playing hockey, and like my whole life's goal was just to take this dream as far as I could, to play hockey at the highest possible level that I could. Like, I ate, slept, and breathed hockey. It was my love, and all I wanted for my life. And while I was in high school, I had this opportunity to actually move away from home and do online high school and live out this dream of playing hockey at a higher level. And like, this is everything I had wanted for my life up to this point. And right before I was to move away, something happened. Right before I was to move away, I ended up getting so sick. I was hospitalized for almost a month of my life. Right? And it was like just like that. Every dream I had was ripped away from me. Like, y'all, I have never been through a more difficult time than that. And in the midst of that, I was not a Christian at this time, and the people that I had surrounded myself with, like, I was realizing that they weren't really my friends. They weren't real friends. They didn't care about me as I'm in the hospital and they can't even come up and visit me. And so in the midst of all of this, like, man, I am just walking through a difficult time. But I look back on that and I see that, man, Jesus had to lay me on my back so that I had nowhere else to look but up. Right? My heart was filled with so many other things other than him. And like, man, those trials, those difficult times were such a blessing because he was clearing out that space on my heart for his kingdom to come. And like, that's how we can have joy in the midst of those trials. That's how we can have joy in the midst of those hard times when they come, because we know that Jesus is actually trying to do something in us through them. But we want to be more like Jesus, and we recognize that that happens through difficult times and through trials, and so we actually have a joy when the trials come. So the second change of perspective that Jesus gives the disciples is on the difficult times that they face. Right? They recognize that it's so much more than just some undesirable events, but that through that, Jesus is trying to mold us into the image of himself. My last point comes from Matthew chapter 24, verses 30 through 31. Jesus says, "Then will appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven, and all the peoples of the earth will mourn when they see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And he will send his angels with a loud trumpet call, and they will gather his elect from the four winds, from one end of heavens to the other." Everything that Jesus has been telling his followers is leading up to this moment where he tells them that he is coming again. And so my last point for you tonight is to fixate on his return. Fixate on his return, right? We know the world, the things of this world are fading, and that in the trials we can be made more like Jesus. We know there's going to be trials, but through them we can be made more like Jesus, and so we face them because we know that in no time he is going to return. In the blink of an eye, he is going to return, and it's going to be over. I just want us to put ourselves in this position for a minute. Bring yourself to this text. Like, the sky, all of a sudden it splits open. Out of nowhere, the sky splits open, and you hear these blaring trumpets sounding. You hear these blaring trumpets, and so you look up and you see Jesus. You see Jesus, the Son of Man, coming down on the clouds. And like, what is that going to be like when that day comes? What is that going to be like on that day? I mean, I don't know about you, but like, I long for that day when Jesus comes back. Right? And the perspective change that Jesus is letting his followers in on is a fixation on this moment. That this moment is coming, this day of his return is coming, and people are going to respond in one of two ways. They're either going to be so excited, or they're going to be in terror because they know that he is coming to judge them. And so Few's like, we have to fixate on this, knowing that this day is coming, and knowing that there are so many students, there are so many people in our lives, there are so many friends who do not yet know Jesus, that this day is coming, and there are so many that are going to be judged by him on that day because they do not yet know him and are not yet walking in relationship to him. As I read these words, I'm reminded of this encounter that Isaiah has with God. In Isaiah chapter 6, verses 1 through 11, it says, in the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord high and exalted, seated on a throne, and the train of his robe filled the temple. Above him were seraphim, each with 6 wings. With 2 wings they covered their face, with 2 they covered their feet, and with 2 they were flying. And they were calling to one another, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord Almighty. The whole earth is full of his glory. At the sound of their voices, the doorposts and thresholds shook, and the temple was filled with smoke. In this moment, Isaiah is getting a glimpse into what our future in heaven is going to be like. I want you to imagine this. These seraphim who are set apart creatures, these are holy creatures. They're set apart themselves, but God is so much further set apart from them that they can't even help but sing all day long about how holy he is and how set apart he is. And Fuse, if you put your faith in Jesus, that's the future we have waiting for us. That is the future that we have waiting for us. But it doesn't stop there. Let me continue on in the text. Isaiah says, Woe to me, I cried. I am ruined. For I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips. And my eyes have seen the King, the Lord Almighty. Then one of the seraphim flew to me with a live coal in his hand, which he had taken with tongs from the altar. With it he touched my mouth and said, See, this has touched your lips. Your guilt is taken away and your sin atoned for. I love this right here. I love this. Then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, Whom shall I send? Whom shall I send? And who will go for us? And this is what Isaiah says in response. He says, Here I am, send me. Here I am, send me. In this moment, Isaiah's sin is taken away. Isaiah's sin is taken away. And the very next step is, who's going to go tell the people about what I just did? Who's going to go tell everyone about what I just did? And so, Fuse, let me just say this to you, that if Jesus has taken your sin away, if you have put your faith in Jesus and by the blood of the Lamb you have been cleansed, the very next step for you is to go tell the people in your life about what he has done. The very next step for you is to go proclaim what he has done in your life. And he is saying those same words to you that he was saying to Isaiah. He's saying, who's going to go for me? Who will go for me? And there's only 2 responses. It's either, Here I am, Lord, send me and I will go. Or it's no. It's either, Here I am, send me, or no. And so, Fuse, we fixate on his return, knowing that he is coming, but knowing that there are so many people who have yet to put their faith in him. And we have a God who is saying, Go tell them about what I have done in your life. Go tell them about how I have transformed your heart. You see, Fuse, this Mount of Olives story is all about the disciples having a change of perspective on their life. That it's not about the disciples' kingdom, right? It's not about our kingdom, but our whole life is about his kingdom. Our whole life is to be focused on eternal things that, man, all your skills and your hobbies and the things you love, those are great, but those are simply ways for you to connect with other people who don't know Jesus. I'm like, yeah, there are going to be hard times, right? But we can have joy in the midst of that because we know that God is doing something in our heart, that through that we become more like him. And if the one desire of our heart is to be more like him, well, then it's a no-brainer to have joy in the midst of the trials, because that's how that happens. And lastly, we fixate on his return. Because like I said, we know he is coming, and we know there are so many people who have yet to put their faith in him. So Fuse, before I close out tonight, man, God is asking you, who's going to go? Who's going to go for me? Who's going to tell the students at ECU about me and what I have done in your life? Who's going to go tell the students at Pitt Community College about me and what I have done in your life? And you got to answer that question of if you will go. Let me pray for us. Jesus, Lord, I just pray for a radical transformation of our lives. Lord, that we would be so focused on your kingdom, God, that our lives would reflect that there are things that are temporary, Lord, and there are things that are eternal. That with all we have, we would be focused on the people around us who do not yet know you, Jesus. Lord, and it is so real how you are coming back. And on that day, if they have not yet put their faith in you, they're going to be facing judgment. Lord, I pray that that would break our hearts just like that breaks yours. Lord, and I pray that we would have this moment just like Isaiah, where we just say, God, here I am, send me. Lord, use my life however you see fit. God, I just want to be a mouthpiece for you at ECU. God, I just want to be a mouthpiece for you at Pitt Community College, in the clubs, in the classes, in the organizations that I'm a part of. Lord, I just want to see more people come to know you, Jesus. Lord, I just pray over the students in this room that we would have that radical transformation. Lord, that change of perspectives on our lives. That we have been bought with a price, and our lives no longer belong to us, Lord, but they belong to you. And so wherever it is that you are calling us, wherever it is that you want us to go, we simply say, yes, Lord, we will do it. Jesus, we love you. We're so excited that we get to worship you.